Good morning to you all. Thanks for inviting me. Thanks for this opportunity to talk to other people that I'm usually talking to. So it's really nice. I'm going to talk about protection of private life, a challenging exercise. And as you can see, I sort of planned this was going to last for 20 minutes because I thought I had 30 minutes, but now I realize that I have 50 minutes. So. Maybe I should talk a little bit slower. But this is sort of what I'm going to talk about. And by way of introduction, I'm a lawyer and coming from legal philosophy. So I'm dealing with sort of legal protection of private life, the issues of private life, freedom of expression, freedom of the press, freedom of the media, these kind of issues from sort of a strictly sort of legal approach, but also a bit more sort of general philosophical approach. And I'm not a technician nor an engineer, and some, including my wife, would probably call me technically impaired. So I'm not very much into all these kind of devices which may have a relation to private life and which may threaten or strengthen or whatever private life. I'm also a techno-optimist in the sense that I think that that human beings are brilliant at inventing technical devices. Well, it doesn't really include myself, but generally human beings are really brilliant at this, and human beings have done this for, well, ever since we started as being human beings. And all these devices, they carry potentials and menaces. And which we then have to deal with. And I mean, this is just as an example, an old technical device like a car is I mean, it's really smart. It could take you around. It could do a lot of things, and it's really practical. But there are also issues that, like for instance, like 45 years ago in Denmark, there was about 1,200 people killed every year by cars. That has actually decreased to a very large extent now, with I think about the triple amount of cars, and the number of dead had gone down. It's still, too much. One dead is one too much, but it's down to about 150 as far as I remember. This is just a general point I want to make, sort of saying, well, we make inventions all the time. They are usually smart inventions, but they usually also carry with it problems that we should deal with in various ways, inclusive technical ways, but of course also legal ways. A few inventions we might have to ban. It doesn't come often, and maybe not in the field that you are working. But for instance, landmines, they don't really serve any sort of good purpose. So we have banned them. We have a convention against landmines. They're actually outlawed. But generally, technical devices are smart, and we just need to, but we need to think, because they usually also have some menaces that we have to deal with. And I hope that I can add a perspective to this conference and what you're doing from my quite different perspective. I'm going to deal with private life, and I would like to take the opportunity to introduce one of my favorite philosophers, the German Jürgen Habermas. He back in '62, I think, he started off his career by writing a book called this is in English, Structural Transformation of the Public Sphere. And it actually also relates to the private sphere. I'm getting back to that. He was interested in this restructuring of the public sphere in Europe, especially England, Germany, and France. Especially, he was focusing sort of starting on the late 17th century onwards. And his point was that, well, something happens here, which is of great interest. A public sphere is emerging, it's transforming, a sphere where we sort of meet as equals, discuss, exchange views, and for him that it's a very important factor. Just as an example, around the year 1700 in London, there was about 3,000 cafes, and they were all open for the public. They were with newspapers, and they served coffee more than alcoholic beverages, which is important because, you know, coffee tends to sort of sharpen your mind, whereas that it doesn't go for alcoholic beverages. So this is, you know, people coming to cafes, drinking coffee, reading newspapers, discussing the news. There was also they also discussed literature. Sort of reading from home, reading something, and then, you know, going into the cafes, discussing what they have sort of learned or what they have read in private was very important. And this is what he then takes into another sort of direction, which I'm not going into. This whole sort of political idea of this open deliberation among equals that we actually got, people, the Europeans, the Germans, the English, the British, the French, had this experience of an open discussion with peers, and he later formulates this idea of the unforced force of the better argument. This whole idea, there's something interesting about a good argument. It kind of seems right, and it's kind of forceful in an unforceful way. I mean, you're not forced to accept a better argument by somebody putting a pistol or threatening you or whatever. You're kind of forced because, this is a better argument. Anyway, that will take us more in the direction of the political. I'm a little bit more sort of turned towards the idea of public sphere here. As this emergent public sphere presupposes at least two things. One, a technical device, or whatever you call it, technical invention, maybe a better word, Gutenberg and the printing. The whole idea of the whole thing of like going to cafes, discussing, was, apart from the coffee, apart from the public that everybody could go, there was also the printing, this invention of printing that you could actually read and then go into discussions and deliberations on what you have read. And this about the reading thing is actually quite important. Just a few days ago, I was at another conference dealing with language and law and other things, and I was discussing with a professor from Nigeria, and he was saying, the whole reason why Europe is presently sort of more advanced is because of the invention of writing and printing. The idea that you can actually pass on information in other ways, etc. So that is quite important. Anyway, that's one thing. The second thing important for my talk here is that it's not only meeting in public and discussing with peers, it's also that it presupposes a private sphere. It presupposes that if you're going to discuss literature, which was in fashion by then you have to do some reading first. You sit at home maybe, or maybe at the cafe, reading. You maybe read the newspaper, or you may read literature. Doesn't really matter, but you read, and you do that sort of on your own. You do that sort of privately, undisturbed. Otherwise, you won't get it. Otherwise, you won't understand what's going on. And this is important, that there's this sort of first step, or step before the public sphere, namely the private sphere, that you do something on your own. You sort of read, you consider, you may have some ideas, some provisionary ideas before bringing them into the public, which you can then discuss with your peers at the cafe or wherever you're discussing them. Of course, also in the newspapers, etc. So the point is that in order to participate in the public sphere, private life is necessary. We need time to read and understand. we need to gather information, we need to focus, we need to develop our own views, our own ideas, even if provisionally, in the sense that we can get some ideas and then we start talking to peers about them, and then they may say, well, this is stupid because blah, 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 or hey, this is a good idea because blah, 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 which is what it's all about. The point here is that in order sort of to come up with ideas, a certain sort of protected sphere, a certain private sphere is necessary. Because if there is no private sphere at all, you don't have the chance to, well, read, getting into things, maybe even getting ideas. So there's this interdependence between private life and the public sphere. So the whole thing Habermas was on, and of course he was more sort of interested in the political side, not so much in the technical side, but I think to a large extent this also goes for technical things. So it was not only a restructuring of the public sphere, restructuring in the sense that from around 1700 there was an emergence of this public sphere where people could meet peers, discussing on equal level, sort of just exchanging views with a sort of non-hierarchical, a horizontal relation rather than a hierarchical relation. There were nobody could issue orders, nobody could tell you, well, this won't do. The church, like for instance, the church could not tell you, well, the earth is flat or whatever they were telling people by the time, so don't come up and make all these kind of inventions or whatever. It was on an equal basis, exchanging views, discussing. And my point is that also presupposes a certain private life, a certain protection, an emergence of private life. In order not to get into what I would call the Amsterdam Syndrome, a couple of years ago I was in Amsterdam and I read a tourist guide, and I don't know whether the story is true, which is not really, it doesn't really matter. But anyway, the story went that in Amsterdam previously they did not have any curtains. Because, they were all very nice people, so they didn't need curtains. Everybody could see what was going on. And then, of course, nothing of interest went, the limits to what people could do when the curtains were drawn. So everybody looked nice and pure conformity, nothing special happened. So this is what I'll call the Amsterdam Syndrome, that, well, of course we need some publicity, but we also need privacy. We also need a private life, because otherwise it would be totally conformity. We would just, do what is expected of us, which is not a good thing. So interestingly, when backing up, which I would do sort of as a lawyer and the legal philosopher, backing up the public sphere, that we need this transparency, we need the possibility of exchanging views. This, of course, also goes for the scientific community, for technical community. But that doesn't imply that we need sort of 100% transparency. On the contrary, we also need some kind of, well, maybe not privacy, but sometime where we can sort of exchange, get ideas, do things that may not, at least to begin with, be meant for whoever would be interested. I'm just about reading Glenn Greenwald's No Place to Hide. He was the journalist dealing with Snowden, going to Hong Kong and getting all these things out. And one of his comments, sort of just in passing, he mentions his comment that he noticed that, he's referring to studies, which I haven't checked, admittedly, but he's referring to studies that says that being watched, when people are being watched, they tend to be more sort of confined, more cautious, which, of course, for inventions, ideas, stupid things, whatever, is not so good. So we need this. We need to be out of spotlight, at least sometimes, and at least to a certain extent. Obviously, private life may serve as sort of a firewall protecting illegal activities. So private life, not only is it a necessity, but it may also be sort of a menace or a threat or something. Could be ranging from child abuse to illegal economic activities, also technical activities like making bombs or suicide bombs or whatever people would like to do. And they would like to have some privacy so that nobody can see what they're actually doing. So private life is in the same way as sort of we don't need total transparency is not a very good idea. Transparency, publicity is very important, but sort of absolute transparency doesn't work because we need this room for thinking up ideas and reading, inventing things, etc. But of course, private life, which is then necessary, doesn't work if it's absolute in the sense that we know for sure that nobody would never get in here because unfortunately, things that we don't like to happen may happen. That includes, and this may be more interesting from the legal point of view, that implies that there should be no absolute protection of private life. This is actually why I call it private life rather than privacy, but I'm getting back to this in a moment. There should be no absolute protection. Of course, there should be some protection. We need protection by law, and also, I'm a little bit in doubt here, but probably also by use of more sort of technical devices that we need some protection from spying, etc. But there should be no absolute protection in the sense that some places where nobody would ever look because then we know that things we don't like to happen may actually happen. So it's a little bit complicated because we need this balancing rather than absolute protection. Where did I put this in? Oh yeah, it's here. Getting a little bit on private life versus privacy, and I'm a little bit in doubt, not being a sort of native English speaker or American speaker, then I don't know whether this is totally true. I got it from the European Commission of Human Rights. They were dealing, back in the 70s, they were dealing with the right to private life. Just a little bit more piece of information I can give you, since I'm not so short of time as I have thought. The European Convention of Human Rights, back from after the Second World War, with like 10, 15 sort of basic rights, of which the right to private life was one. And in the course of time, the Commission and later the court started receiving complaints and sort of dishing out decisions, judgments as to whether private life was actually violated or not. And one of the first cases that they were dealing with was X versus Iceland back from '76. It was actually kind of a funny case because it dealt with a person who said that he wanted to keep a dog, and in the apartments where he was living, dogs were not allowed. And he says, this is an intrusion of my private life. So he brought that before under the European Convention of Human Rights, he brought that before the Commission. The Commission said, well, this is not really an infringement, but interestingly, for our purposes here, they made a distinction in saying that, well, it's not only privacy as they are talking about in the Anglo-Saxon fields. It's not only sort of fencing in, it's not only a question of no trespassing, this is private property, sort of keep out. Private life, the Commission stated, goes much further. Private life includes that we have the possibility to develop relations with others. There shouldn't be total transparency that everybody knows who we are seeing all the time. We should have this chance of developing relations, which, at the beginning may sometimes be a bit sort of vulnerable or fragile. It's also develop the personality, develop personal autonomy. These are parts of private life, and these are part of what is protected under the European Convention of Human Rights. So it's not only sort of private life, sort of fencing in, keep out kind of thing, but it's also having a sphere where you can actually develop your own personality, develop ideas, these kind of things, which I think is a very important, it goes very much in line with the Habermas idea. I wonder whether they read him, I don't know. But it's kind of the same approach that we need this private sphere in order to be able to, go out in the public sphere and be sort of grown-up persons with ideas and personality and inventions, etc. So it's not merely the right to be left alone, but the right to develop as an individual, well, to do stupid things and try out wild ideas, etc., in order to be able to participate in social life. And now I'm forwarding a hypothesis, and I don't know whether it holds, but there's some interesting thing going on here. In relation to China, China has definitely much lower protection of private life. I think there's no doubt about that. It also seems to me, but I'm not very knowledgeable in this field, but it also seems to me that Chinese production is much more copying than it's actually innovative. Is there a relation? I tend to think there is a relation. This is hypothesis. I don't know whether this is true, but I tend to think it's true that because if there's sort of a continuous surveillance, continuing some checking on conformity, then we may become very good at copying because it's easy to see what the others are doing, but we may not be so good to be inventive, to come up with inventions, because you need some space, you need some room for allowing sometimes stupid, but sometimes very good ideas, and who knows which are stupid and which are good if you don't come up with them in order sort of to keep in line and don't and try to look a little bit like your neighbor. Anyway, this is the point, that we need to protect private life, not in an absolute sense, but in some kind of a relative and, of course, difficult sense. The challenges then, what are the challenges to private life? And I think there are constant challenges. It's not new. It's not that once upon a time, back in 1700, then there was private life and it was perfectly protected and nothing was wrong. Of course, that isn't the case. There has always been attempts at intruding private life, letter reading, wiretapping, all sorts of things. So private life has been sort of challenged or infringed continuously. What I think is new probably is that we have new technical devices, new technical inventions that may sort of menace or threaten private life in new ways. So we have to think that over, and to be aware, is the Amsterdam Syndrome looming? Does it seem like we're getting in trouble here? That we can trace whatever we are doing, whoever we are meeting. Everything is transparent, which, according to this idea from Habermas, etc., I think is dangerous. So let me just sort of try to make a brief outline of what I see as the challenges. And those are come, I think, basically from three sides. One, sort of the private, and I'm not talking about companies, but sort of private person uploading. It comes from state surveillance, and it comes from private companies who has all sorts of commercial interests in knowing exactly what we're doing and what our preferences are, etc. So one, private uploading. The internet, and especially social media, is emerging as a sort of a semi-public sphere, semi-public in the sense that it's not really private, it's not totally public in the sense that you usually have friends and you have to sort of accept them and these kind of things. And apparently people are uploading all sorts of pics and flicks, pictures and videos, which was previously conceived as very private. But apparently not anymore. People are uploading their sexual experiences, etc. What is this? I don't know, actually. Is that drawing back the Amsterdam curtains so that everybody can see what's going on? Or is it actually which I would kind of tend to see that's a little bit on the negative side, or is it rather sort of bringing personal experiences to the cafe? This is kind of a new cafe for common contemplation and maybe even consideration. Have ideas. This is how we do it. Maybe you should do it in the same way, or you should try another, or whatever. I'm a little bit in doubts here, but my main, sort of the underlying point, is that privacy, the notion, the perception of private life is changing, and what used to be very private is not so private anymore. Recently, there was a book out by John Ronson about public shaming, and he's which happens a lot on the internet. But people could be publicly shamed. One example was actually now if you're getting bored, I hope you're not, but if you're getting bored, then some of you made a little bit sort of sarcastic remark or something. And that was actually done in some kind of a talk at some technical university in the United States. And the remark was also a little bit sort of sexist, but it was only from like one pole to the other. But then just on the next row, there was a person taking a picture of them and uploading the remark, which was, when it was out in the public, it was kind of stupid. We say all sorts of stupid things. Well, at least I do. Well, I wasn't involved in this one though. But the point is that what we do in private, that all of a sudden it's out there in this public sphere, and actually the guy making the remark, he ended up being fired because, of course, his employer couldn't accept having this man with a sexist remark on his payroll, so he was actually fired. So all this about sort of total transparency and not being able to make stupid remarks is quite important. On the other hand, getting back to John Ronson, who was investigating this, he also realized that, well, then there were, and he had some examples on people who had their sort of not obviously normal sexual life sort of transposed. There was one guy from Britain who had like sex with 5 in uniforms and everything, and that was uploaded, and it was like, what happened? Not much. And had that been 50 years ago, he couldn't have kept his kept his job or anything, I'm quite sure. Anyway, Ronson's point here, or maybe the point that I'm getting out of Ronson, is that this notion of what is private and what we cannot accept is changing. But there's still all the time something that we do not accept. And so therefore, we still need a certain protection of private life. So that's the private uploading. There are definitely also problems relating to sort of privates uploading from others. And I think there are various issues at stake here. The rapidity. There's this idea of thinking fast and slow. We are sometimes very good at doing things very fast, which is a good thing. Otherwise, we wouldn't have survived. But sometimes you also have to think, and I guess you all know this. Thinking through a problem, and it's really burdensome, and we have to think it over, and it's troublesome, and we. Anyway, the problems relating to private uploading is that apparently it often happens quite fast without really sort of considering things. And fast and intuitive thinking is often mistaken. So there are some issues here in relation to the challenges of private life. Excuse me. Secondly, it's for free. I mean, you can sort of comment on everything. You can have ideas on everything, on anything, and it's for free. It doesn't cost you anything. It's not like if you have a certain, I don't know, your political idea or whatever, and then you engage in it and you spend time on it, and you maybe spend also some of your money on it. But here on the internet, you can just sort of upload an opinion on something, and it's totally free. There's no need to be engaged. And there may be a problem, I'm a little bit in doubts here, but I think we may face a problem of concentration and focus, which may be a problem for a new generation who always do one thing, two things, three things at a time, checking, checking the iPhone, checking the email, checking whatever people is doing. And of course that's possible to some extent, but the concentration and the slow thinking, which is needed also sometimes, may be in jeopardy. So I think that's one challenge, that apparently we just do all these things ourselves. We tend to threaten private life, actually. Then, of course, there are the state, the big brothers watching you, very often in the name of security. I think especially at least all sort of Western liberal democracies have in the past 15 years expanded all in the name of security, all sorts of surveillance things, not only in the United States, also in Denmark, in France. I haven't checked this sort of thoroughly, but definitely there are issues here. Technology runs both ways in the sense that we can do surveillance, but privacy protection can also be sort of secured or helped or assisted by technical devices. But there are some challenges here, legal challenges as well as technical challenges. Is it actually possible to protect private life anymore? Just one minor example, or maybe not minor, but at least in a local example, in Denmark we use the sort of personal, what you call that, you have a personal number, which is used with personal identification, and you go there and you can get, it's a social insurance and these kind of things. And they have been traditionally seen as very private. They shouldn't come out in the open. But now, then there are leakages, and all of a sudden 100,000 of these figures are out, and it seems to be very, very difficult to keep them secret, to keep them private. What do we do about it? Try to keep them private, or maybe just say, well, they're not that private, but then maybe we should sort of detach, or whatever should be done. I definitely don't have all the answers, but there are some challenges here, quite sure. How to strike a balance between surveillance, which I think we need some kind of surveillance, and private life. It should be done by law, also by public opinion. And I don't so much have the answers, but just sort of suggesting that here are some challenges in going from the point that we need some protection of private life. And as the last one, commercial interests. It's kind of privatizing the public. A couple of months ago, there was, I think, a provocative headline in the newspaper saying, is there any public space left on the internet? Sort of saying, isn't it all private? It's all sort of commercialized. You cannot enter the internet without sort of, and in order to get there, you have to tick off cookies, and you have to tick off, you accept all kinds of things that you haven't the slightest idea what you're accepting. And for various more or less sort of well understood commercial interests. This may also be a problem. Going back to Habermas, he would say in a later work of his, he was talking about the system world, the world of system colonizing the private world, the world of life. What did he call it? Human life. So is this actually a way of colonizing that we have hardly any space left for as human beings, but it's all being colonized either by sort of state power or by money power. Okay. That's where I will end. I don't have so many answers, but hopefully a little bit of ideas, the importance of protecting private life, and also at least some of the issues involved. Yeah. So, yeah. And we have time for questions and discussions and comments and. I know that there may be some sort of virtual things, but also in real life. So let's just take them from front.
Any deep thoughts on anonymous speech? I know some places on the internet you can participate in discussions anonymously. Any observations, thoughts?
I probably tend to be a little bit skeptic but maybe that's because I'm old-fashioned. Because I tend to think that, okay, once you're discussing, then you should be there in the open. This is the public, you're on the cafe, and it's for free. You can, deal with your opinions. Sort of back in the old days with the professional media, with the journalists, etc., then they have special protection, so that if you want to pass on some information or whatever to a journalist, you can do that. I mean, of course, you have to trust the journalist, but then the journalist is protected by law, which says you sort of 99% you don't have to reveal your sources. And I think that actually that makes a lot of sense. Then discussing, just uploading all sorts of opinions anonymously, I tend to be very skeptical, because why do you need this what's that called? Anonymity. Why do you need this? I mean, it's opinions. And, we have, at least I'm talking about some Western world, Denmark, we have freedom of speech. So unless you really, go in for it and, this minister should be killed, and I have the devices and I'm going to do it tomorrow, which is illegal under Danish law and probably under most law in the world. If you don't want to do these things, you're actually quite free to discuss all sorts of things. So I don't really see the need for doing it anonymously, apart from, being, having the liberty to infringe on the law, and I don't really see the point.
Yeah. I have a couple of remarks. You were mentioning the CPR system.
Yeah.
I mean, the whole issue about that is based on the ignorance of the people doing that. The CPR system was never intended to have some sort of security that was about uniqueness. So any discussion related to that, it's not the system, it's the people. They're doing it wrong, and it's just a bad excuse because they're handling this wrong. It's not the system. Another thing...
Can I just make a brief remark, not being very much into this, whatever happened with the CPR system, but I have I'm feeling slightly uneasy when it's not the system, it's the people, because if you have people working, you always have people working in the system.
But nobody told them that it was supposed to be a secret. It was just, it's the same as saying that your license plate on your car is a secret. How stupid is that? It doesn't make sense. It makes sense to people that doesn't care or aren't well educated, but it doesn't make sense. It's like, it's okay, let's pretend it's a secret. Well, things are not a secret. It wasn't secret 20 years ago, and it's definitely not a secret today. Mm-hmm. Another thing is...
License plates, of course they're not secret. That doesn't make sense. But there's still some issues there, like if, for instance, you take photographs in the public sphere, which you're allowed to do, then if you're uploading it, you may have to, or at least you consider whether you should actually sort of blur the license plates. But, hey, this was actually the neighbor visiting, these kind of things. So, of course, it's not a secret, but still there may be a certain element of private life which need to be protected. And this is, of course, where it gets complicated.
Yeah, you could say that. Another thing, another example is the cookie law. Thinking that implementing something called a cookie law, cookie as a way of identifying people is like old school. You can do much better thing. And we wasted so many money, so many years on something so useless as a cookie law. That's just my opinion, but the last thing I would like to talk about is that we're talking about privacy, but as I see it, the most important thing is that privacy at some point became a commodity. I'm paying for the convenience, the usage of the internet with my privacy. I can either do it or I can't. And I'm accepting that. Every time I visit a website, every time I install an app, I'm saying, okay, I'm paying with my privacy. Nobody's discussing this. Mm-hmm. That's the biggest issue. And if we all say it's okay to have privacy as a commodity, well, what's the problem?
the problem is the Amsterdam Syndrome.
But that is more of a saying, that's more of saying, I would like to show off stuff. I don't see that as a question of privacy. That's what basically saying, 20 years ago it was okay to go topless on the beach. Today it's not, and in 20 years it's okay to go topless again. I mean, in this case, I think it's not about privacy. That's, some would say, moral. I don't think it's a.
I think, but I don't actually think we disagree that much. But my point is that if we sort of commodify privacy, and I think you definitely have a point here. But I think the problem is that, and there's a certain paternalistic approach here, admittedly, that whatever we accept may not be sort of for the mutual benefit, and selling off private life, I think in the end does imply problems if we can, whatever we are doing on the internet, I mean, and we are on the internet, can be traced and can be used against us.
But isn't that my personal decision, saying I'm willing to pay with that? Another thing, I mean, you can hinder me from doing that just because you think I'm stupid. I mean, saying I'm paying with my privacy. Mm-hmm. That's, I can also choose to pay the website some money, and by that I'm relieved of commercials that are tracking whatever I do, etc. But it's a choice whether I choose to believe on the people saying, I'm not setting out your movements or whatever your trackings to third party.
Yep, it's a relevant discussion, and I tend to be a bit more sort of on the skeptical side. I don't think we are able to make all the time to make highly rational choices.
Aren't anonymity or either anonymity or false identifiers our only defense? I mean, I am asking you a question now, but this is going out on YouTube, so this question is actually asked for the whole world to hear. Mm-hmm. My only defense is that nobody knows who I am.
Yeah. But that were probably questions that you wouldn't put. Maybe not. I tend to think so. That there were certain questions that you wouldn't put in a public audience. It may also be, I don't know, it may also be a question of getting a customer to it. Well, you know, it doesn't really matter. As these guys with the sexual things, they on the front page of the Guardian or whichever newspaper was. But then, yeah, it was like, okay.
I mean, a few years ago, more than a few years ago, asking the question if isn't communism great would be a very sure way to end up in prison in the US.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I mean, so it can be a political discussion that are closed off.
Yeah. And you know, perhaps other discussions, but I'm not so sure. I definitely don't have all the answers, but I have a certain tendency to think that we need, at least in certain areas, not to sort of be totally transparent. And how that is done, I cannot answer. But I have, and I think, you know, for discuss these kind of issues, I have no problem at all. And usually when people and my students, you know, can we, you know, tape this? And I knew that my sort of elder colleagues, they would say, no, don't tape it, you know. But I'm just saying, you know, tape it. I don't mind. I may swear and I may look stupid, and it doesn't. I don't think that really matters. But then on the other hand, there are things that I would never say in a public audience anyway. So, but I still need to do that sometimes, you know, talking about colleagues, and I think that are stupid, and I wouldn't say that in public because, you know, I have to work with them, and that was really, you know, so I still think we need this area and we need to protect it in one way or the other. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. There's a lot of. Yeah. Okay. 1, 2, 3.
So could the Icelandic man kill his dog?
No. It was decided in Iceland that he couldn't, and he brought it before the European Commission. By then it was, and they decided that it's not. I don't remember exactly. It's not a serious intrusion of the private life. After all, he could move to another place where he actually could keep a dog. Maybe if the Icelandic legislature had made no dogs, then it could have been another matter. But this was kind of a restricted area. Here you cannot keep dogs in those apartments, and there are other people, and they don't want people, dogs barking at night and all these kind of things. So there was this weighing of interests, and the Commission stated that but the main point is that this is relevant for private life, and then they said, but it's okay, to make that infringement or whatever, to make that trespassing. Yeah.
Yeah, I was thinking about children. Privacy is a difficult concept to understand. How to get them to know this before they get too active on the internet.
Yeah. A little bit, I think just a little bit of information. When I was young in school, we were taught a little bit about traffic law, riding on bicycle and put out your hand and stop and these kind of things so that we wouldn't be run over. And maybe we were run over, but probably it helped a little bit. And I think to my sort of intuition, there's very little knowledge of they just put up whatever without realizing. So I think, a little bit of information that, maybe you should be a little bit careful, like when you're going on the streets and all of a sudden there are cars and, the cars are nice and they are smart, but they might smash you. And the same thing about internet and whatever, that yes, it's nice, use it, of course. Don't be too afraid, but on the other hand, we need to teach our children to be a little cautious. That would be sort of my answer to that. There was one up here, yeah?
Yeah, I was interested in your views on whether the role of the state is changing in relation to this. I mean, in the Nordic countries, Scandinavia, we traditionally kind of had a trust relationship with the state. It's our state, and we trust that they do good. And whilst in other cultures, it's more us and them, and it's the power against us. But do you see this changing here in relation to these issues?
I don't think I would be the right one to answer that. I think it's difficult because I'm also sort of biased in the sense that I think we should. It's something to be, kept. It's a good thing that we have a certain amount of trust. Not, a certain amount, also a little bit of skepticism, but a certain amount of trust, which makes our society function quite good. I can go to, yesterday I lost my driver's license and I went to, to the Kommune public office and, things were done and smoothly, and I think that's actually a very good thing. Whether it's changing, well, it's difficult to say sort of in the long run. I tend to think that these things, if we take care, things are changing, but it may not sort of lower the trust much. But a lot of things are involved here, and I wouldn't be the one to predict.
I think we are out of time.
Okay.
But thank you.
Yeah, okay. Thank you.